The sun was just rising over the airport. It was quiet, peaceful, and cold. Inside the terminal, Ibrahim Traoré sat calmly near gate 37. He wasn't wearing his suit. He had no bodyguards. He didn't carry anything fancy. To most people, he looked like any other African traveler. But he wasn't just anyone. He was Ibrahim Traoré, the President of Burkina Faso. He liked to travel simply, no cameras, no big announcements. He liked being close to the people, blending in and staying humble. He had just come back from an important meeting in Europe. They had talked about gold, independence, and Africa's future. Now all he wanted was to go home. As he walked toward the Air France flight to Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré greeted an airport worker in French with a warm smile. "Bonjour, Xavier?" The worker smiled back, not knowing who he really was. That's exactly how Traoré liked it. He got on the plane quietly, gave a polite nod to the flight crew, and sat in business class, seat 2A by the window. No one seemed to notice him, and he thought no one cared. But a few rows behind him, people had already started whispering. A senior French businessman, the head of a big energy company, was also flying to Burkina Faso. He was used to luxury, red carpets, champagne, and first-class service everywhere he went. When he got to the gate, the airline staff told him that business class was full. The CEO didn't like that. He didn't take no for an answer. That's when the trouble started. It began small, just a complaint, but it was about to grow into something bigger. The French CEO wasn't used to being told no. He stood at the gate, surrounded by his assistants and airline staff, tapping his shiny shoes on the floor, clearly annoyed. The CEO spoke proudly, "I'm a key partner in many African projects." To him, that meant rules didn't matter. He demanded an upgrade right away. The gate agents rushed to help. They whispered to each other. They checked their tablets. But the truth was clear. Business class was full. Every seat was taken. Still, the CEO kept pushing. That's when the airline called a senior flight attendant. Her name was Claire. She was tall, white, and wore the Air France uniform. With a tight smile, she walked onto the plane to fix the problem. Inside, Claire looked around the cabin carefully, as if searching for something or someone. Her eyes stopped when she saw a dark-skinned man sitting in seat 2A. Ibrahim Traoré was quietly reading something on his phone, calm as always. She looked again. No fancy watch. No assistant. No signs of power. Just a black man in a hoodie. She leaned toward another flight attendant and whispered, "Probably a mistake." Then she walked over to him with a fake smile and said politely but firmly, "Monsieur, may I see your boarding pass?" Traoré looked up, nodded, and gave it to her. She looked at the ticket, then looked at him. The seat number was correct. But something in her mind didn't feel right. To her, he didn't look like someone who should be sitting there. A few moments later, she came back, still smiling but more direct this time. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we may need to move you to make space for another passenger. Would you mind moving to economy? We will offer you compensation." There was the insult, quiet but clear. Ibrahim Traoré raised an eyebrow. "And why me?" he asked calmly. "No reason, sir," she replied, trying to stay composed. "It's just a small change for another guest," Claire said. "A guest more important than me?" he asked, still calm. Claire didn't answer. She just smiled again. Some passengers nearby looked over, sensing something wasn't right, but no one said anything. Ibrahim stayed in his seat and said quietly, "No, I will stay right here." The tension had started, but the real trouble hadn't yet begun. Claire was shocked. A man like him saying no to her? She wasn't used to that, especially not from a black African passenger, and not during her shift. She smiled again, but this time it was forced. Her pride was hurt. "Sir, I must insist," she said in a colder voice. "This is for operational reasons." But Ibrahim didn't move. He looked straight at her and said, "If this is really about operations, then tell me, why are you asking me to move and not someone else?" Claire paused. She wasn't ready for that kind of quiet strength. Now, a few people in business class were watching closely. One man lowered his newspaper. A woman stopped typing on her laptop. Everyone felt something was off, but no one spoke. The CEO still hadn't boarded. He was being kept at the gate until a seat was made available. Claire walked quickly to the cockpit, whispered something to the captain, then came back with a decision. Claire didn't say anything to Traore this time. Instead, she walked over to another black man in business class, then another. It was clear she was only picking people who looked like they didn't belong. That was her second big mistake. Traore stayed quiet and watched. His face showed nothing, but his mind was sharp. He was paying attention, noticing every detail. The insult didn't make him angry. It made him more focused. Then a young African man, maybe in his late 20s, looked confused as Claire pointed to his seat. "You, sir, we need you to move to economy," she said. The young man asked, "Why me?" Claire didn't answer. She just took his boarding pass. That's when Traore stood up. "Enough," he said, calm but firm. His voice carried weight. "You're choosing people based on skin color, not their tickets. That's discrimination." Claire turned toward him, a little shaken. "Sir, I'll have to ask you to sit down. Please don't make a scene." Traore looked her straight in the eyes. For a moment she froze. His stare was strong, steady, there was power behind it. But she still didn't know who he really was. To her, he was just another passenger causing trouble. Claire walked away again, angry and embarrassed. Under her breath in French she muttered, "These people. Always making noise," Claire muttered. The CEO was finally brought on board. Claire welcomed him with extra care and a big smile. She offered him a glass of champagne. "We're fixing the seating issue, monsieur," she said. Meanwhile, Traore sat back down. He fastened his seat belt and calmly tapped the armrest with his fingers. He didn't need to say anything. Soon, the world would know what had happened, and who had been disrespected. The CEO walked past him and sat in business class like a king returning to his throne. He didn't even look at Traore. Claire made sure the CEO was comfortable. She adjusted his seat, gave him warm towels, and poured another glass of champagne. The message was clear: you matter. That man does not. The plane rolled down the runway and took off, leaving French ground behind, but carrying a moment that would soon shake both France and Burkina Faso. Inside, everything seemed normal. People relaxed. The seatbelt signs turned off. But under the surface, something strong was building. A quiet storm waiting to explode. Traore stayed calm. He didn't complain. He didn't shout. He didn't reveal who he was. He just sat there like a man watching a story he already knew the ending to. Claire, the flight attendant, kept avoiding his eyes. Something about him made her uneasy, but she ignored it. Later in the flight, she came back to his seat, forcing a smile. "Would you like anything to drink, sir?" Claire asked. He looked at her. "Water is fine," he said. She nodded quickly and walked away. No apology. No kindness. No respect. Meanwhile, the CEO was treated like a star. Claire laughed at his jokes, leaned in close when he spoke, and asked about his big projects in Africa. He answered proudly, "Burkina Faso is lucky to have us. We're bringing order to chaos." Claire nodded, agreeing with him, completely unaware that the man he was talking about was sitting just 2 rows away. One woman in the cabin, an African nurse on her way home to Bobo de Lasso, saw everything. She shook her head and whispered to the person next to her, "That's our president. They don't even know who they're disrespecting." Her seatmates' eyes went wide, but they stayed quiet. It was clear the president didn't want attention, and no one wanted to speak up. Hours passed. The cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers fell asleep. But Ibrahim Traoré stayed awake, looking out the window at the clouds. He wasn't angry. He was waiting. And when the plane touched down in Ouagadougou, that calm patience would turn into something unforgettable. The plane began its slow descent. The lights came back on. The captain made the announcement in French and English, letting passengers know they were about to land. People stretched, fastened their seatbelts, and got ready. Claire walked down the aisle with her clipboard, still smiling at the CEO and completely ignoring Ibrahim Traoré. Outside the window, the view was beautiful. The golden sun shone over the red soil, and the city below was starting to wake up as the plane slowly descended. But what the passengers couldn't see yet was the convoy waiting on the tarmac, rows of black SUVs, military vehicles, and a presidential escort. Inside the plane, soft whispers started. "I see soldiers. Are we landing in a war zone?" A foreign passenger asked, sounding nervous. No, that's just military protocol," someone else explained. "Maybe someone important is arriving." The French CEO smirked. "It must be for me," he chuckled, looking at Claire. She laughed with him, already planning to escort him off the plane first. She even thought she would personally take him to the terminal. But before the plane even fully stopped, the whole atmosphere shifted. Out the window, passengers saw presidential guards standing in sharp rows, weapons at their sides, standing at attention. Behind them were Burkina Faso's top ministers, the defense minister, the foreign minister, even the head of security, all standing still in the heat like statues. Claire peeked out the window, shocked. "What is this?" she whispered. The CEO stood up proudly, smoothing his suit. "Clearly this is for me. I told you I'm involved in big projects here." But before anyone could leave the plane, a tall officer in a black beret boarded. His boots echoed as he walked slowly down the aisle, scanning every face. He stopped at seat 2A. He raised his hand to his forehead in a perfect military salute. "Mr. President, welcome home." The entire cabin went silent. You could almost hear everyone's heart stop. Claire's face dropped, her eyes darting between the officer and the man she had ignored the whole flight. Her hands started to shake. Ibrahim Traoré slowly stood up, calm and dignified. He didn't say a word. The CEO took a step back, his mouth slightly open. "President?" he stuttered, shocked. Traoré turned and gave the CEO a simple nod. No anger, no pride, just a man who no longer needed to say anything. Another officer stepped in. "We have instructions," he said coldly, looking at Claire and the CEO. "You two will come with us immediately." "Wait, what?" Claire whispered. "Why me?" "You are being detained for questioning," the officer replied sharply. "You publicly disrespected the head of state on national soil. That is a serious offense." Claire tried to laugh nervously, looking around. No, this has to be a mistake. I was just doing my job." But no one was listening. Traoré stepped off the plane and was immediately surrounded by his people. His guards, his ministers, and a cheering crowd outside the airport fence. Cameras flashed. The nation's leader had returned. But this time everyone knew the truth. He had been among them as an ordinary man, and those who judged him by his appearance would now face the consequences. Back on the plane, Claire and the CEO were being led away in handcuffs. Passengers watched in disbelief as they were escorted down the steps, their heads lowered, their arrogance shattered. And that was just the beginning. The tarmac was hot under the Burkina Faso sun, but all eyes were on Claire and the CEO, being taken away in handcuffs. Gone were their smug smiles. Gone was their arrogance. Now there was only panic, confusion, and disbelief. They were put into two separate black vehicles, surrounded by elite presidential guards. No one spoke to them, not even the officers. The silence was louder than any words. It was the silence of power being reclaimed and dignity being defended. Inside the terminal, President Ibrahim Traoré stood in front of a small group of reporters. He spoke calmly, with no anger in his voice, but his words were clear and unforgettable. "In Burkina Faso, we don't judge a man by his skin. We don't bow to money or old colonial ways. Here we respect dignity, humanity, and our people. That is the new Africa." The story spread quickly. Videos were leaked online showing the arrest, images of the military saluting Traoré, and news clips of the CEO being dragged away, looking like a child caught stealing. Social media exploded. #RespectAfrica and #IStandWithBurkina trended worldwide. Young people across Africa cheered, celebrating a moment they would never forget. At the Ministry of Justice, Claire and the CEO were formally charged with public insult, discrimination against the head of state, disrespect on Burkina Faso soil, abuse of power, and attempted intimidation. The French embassy tried to step in, making phone calls to get involved. Diplomatic requests flooded in, but Traoré was firm in his response. "This is not a colony. This is a sovereign nation. They will face justice like anyone else." Meanwhile, Air France scrambled to handle the situation. Within 24 hours, the airline issued a public statement, a clumsy apology full of corporate speak and empty regret. But it wasn't enough. Citizens of Burkina Faso started calling for a boycott, and soon other African countries joined in. Claire, now locked up in a detention center outside Ouagadougou, broke down in tears during questioning. "I didn't know who he was," she cried. "I was just following procedures." The investigator looked at her coldly. "You didn't need to know who he was. You just needed to treat him like a human being." The CEO, facing possible legal trouble both in Burkina Faso and France, tried to use his influence to get out of the mess. But the court made a strong decision. No one was above the law. Everyone would be treated equally. Traoré didn't boast or mock them. He simply went back to the presidential palace and kept working, building roads, helping young people, strengthening the military, and protecting the country. But that moment on the plane became a story people would talk about for years. A quiet man in a hoodie, a flight attendant with prejudice, a CEO full of pride, and a landing that changed everything.